Good morning. I've learned that in the South you should always say good morning. I'm excited to be here. I think as a health center, we're all the more excited that we are very new in the lean journey. We've been on our journey for less than 2 years. And so for LEI through Alice Lee to have thought that we had something to contribute to the greater lean community and the learning was really quite exciting. So Lynn Community Health Center, which I'll probably refer to as Lynn throughout the talk, is a federally qualified health center. It is located in the coastal city of Lynn, which is about 10 miles north of Boston. Like all FQHCs in the United States, we are a social justice institution. Our mission is to take care of anybody who shows up at our doorstep, regardless of their ability to pay. So that means that we take care of people without insurance. We take care of people who are undocumented. We take care of people who are homeless or near homeless. We take care of people who have mental illnesses that are so severe that they have difficulty accessing mainstream institutions. And we take care of the poor and the very poor. 90% of our patients live at or at 200% of the federal poverty line. 2/3 of our patients are served in a language better served in a language other than English. Our 5 biggest groupings of language are English, Spanish, Cambodian, Arabic, and Russian. We do this by providing comprehensive primary care and behavioral health services, and this includes dental and vision services. By necessity and by design, we've become a regional leader in the integration of primary care and behavioral health. We serve about 40,000 patients, which is about half of the city of Lynn. So I'll make a short pause there, because you're thinking, a lot of you are thinking, that's great. It's a wonderful institution, great mission, but why did LEI choose to partner with such a small outfit? And the background for that is that there are 1,300 community health centers in the US. We are all individual, but we are all connected. And when one of us finds something that is great at enhancing our mission, we are pretty quick to adopt it. We serve about 10% of the American population. But more poignantly, 1 in 6 of all Medicaid recipients receive their care in a community health center. 1 in 3 of all people who are uninsured receive care through a health center. So what about our own situation? Our budget is about 70% generated through our own operations. 5% comes from the federal government, and about 20 to 25% comes from grants and donations. So a very far cry from the MAS company that we heard from yesterday. Lynn, to relate to the talk that just happened today with Eric, was once a great city in the industrial age, but is struggling to recover from that time. Lynn was once the shoe capital of the United States, and it was a hotbed of abolitionism. All the factories are now gone, except for GE Aviation, which maintains a presence. One of the distinguishing marks of Lynn is that we are a gateway city. We're an official city where immigrants get resettled by the State Department. So that means that every day, we have dozens of people coming from all over the world to start their American lives. And we, as a health center, guarantee their access to quality care.
So everybody tells you that when a CEO leaves an organization, that is invested in lean that it all falls apart. So I'm here to tell you, I think it's possible for the lean transition to be enhanced by a change of CEO. I'm Laurie Berry. I'm the former CEO of the Lynn Community Health Center. I was there for 21 years, which is kind of long for an organization like a community health center. And I was very interested in keeping the work we were doing on lean going and actually doing more.
So it would be natural when you're thinking of having a hand in picking your successor or influencing the people that will be picking your successor, to think of somebody who is as similar as possible to yourself, to ensure continuity of constancy of purpose. So Laurie is in her mid-60s. I am generously in my mid-40s, if 48 counts as mid. Laurie grew up in California. She grew up in the Bay Area and didn't leave the Bay Area until she was in her mid-20s. I spent my childhood in the ex-Belgian colony of the Congo, then Zaire. I spent my teenage years mostly in Switzerland and moved to the US by the time I was 19. Laurie is a hard-charging social worker, a product of the flower generation who has never met an obscenity that she didn't later adopt. I am a non-confrontational, consensus-seeking leader who grew up in a military dictatorship and who came of age as a black man in predominantly white spaces during the culture wars of the 90s.
So my interest in lean started really almost from the beginning. I didn't have words for it. We didn't call it lean back then. But I found myself always looking for something, some way of solving the problems that you could see every time we produced a patient care visit, which is almost like any other product that is manufactured, I guess. I could see that there were so many different people in the health center that contributed to a visit, that the coordination, the communication, the whole process, there are so many things that could go wrong and frequently did. I was always just so relieved when I heard about a fabulous patient visit where everything went right.
So essentially, Laurie, to sort of harken back to the prophets of her religious tradition, was a prophet. She had intuited that there was something missing in her 20 years of being a leader in a community health center. There was a hole that she'd identified, and that hole was essentially a hand waiting for lean to fall in. I, on the other hand, did not have such a peaceful spiritual experience when it comes to welcoming lean. For me, it came from the fact that I had worked in 4 different health centers, and I was experiencing deep frustration. If you've ever been in social justice institutions, you will be impressed by the dedication and the passion that people bring to the work that they do. And yet, despite that incredible passion, that admiration that I had for my colleagues, and the occasional phenomenal talent that was in community health centers, generally the delivery of service, if you call it challenging or chaotic, that would be an understatement.
So really what impressed me about lean was this whole idea of developing staff. It wasn't just about improving the process, it was really about developing staff and getting them engaged and enthusiastic about the work. And from the beginning of our work with lean, that was what impressed me, is I had enthusiastic staff at every level, where before I had people who were looking at their watch, when is it time to go home, sometimes looking a little less happy in the workplace. This was different.
Curiously enough, for someone with aforementioned consensus-seeking values, it wasn't that employee engagement that really spoke to me about lean. So let me give you some background. The happiest day of my life occurred in July of 1989. I actually know that day, and I can still see it. Embarrassingly enough, especially when my wife is present, it wasn't my wedding day. It wasn't the birth of my two wonderful children. It wasn't even the day my family escaped the civil war in the Congo, nor is it achieving all those honors and awards that my parents are great at trotting out to their neighbor when they're emptying out the trash. The day is actually crystallized in a moment, and that moment occurred in the Brussels airport. I had just landed from Kinshasa in the Congo, and I was taking my green passport, my green Congolese passport. I was putting it away, and I was bringing out the one that has the golden eagle on a blue background on it. That's, for those of you guys who don't remember, that's your American passport. And please don't misunderstand me. I will always feel that the Congo is where my truest destiny lies. I will always feel that that's where I should be, and that that's really where I belong. But what I was escaping, and what millions of young people like me were escaping, was the complete absence of hope. Essentially, living in the Congo meant that you were given one guarantee, and that is that you in no way, shape, or form could control or shape your own future. And it was that I was escaping, and it's that even at that age, at 19, I knew confusedly that's what was happening, and that's why it was the happiest moment of my life. And unfortunately, my fears did come true. And within a few years, our house was looted by mobs. My father was on the run. Most of my family and colleagues, or colleagues of my father, were in prison. And the first few hundreds of what would become over 5 million dead were lying in the streets in Kinshasa. And I realize now, that the frustration that I felt in community health centers was, I hearkened back to that hopelessness that I felt in the Congo. And I felt that that acceptance of mediocrity that we had in community health centers was similar. It was this sort of, what can you do? Things are really bad. And so the only response we had in community health centers was essentially to bear the cross and accept things the way they were. And I think Lean represented, for my professional life, what that Brussels moment had represented for my personal life. It represented a way out of that path of despair that I saw in community health centers. It represented a possible path to deliver a great product.
I think it was the fall of 2015. I had essentially a new senior management team. Some people had left, some new people were there, and I thought it was a really great opportunity to do something together. In all our previous efforts on performance improvement, I was the one, telling everybody that's what we should do. We called up the GE Foundation and asked if they would help finance a visit to Theta Care, which was a hospital system in Wisconsin that was doing a lot of great work on Lean, and we thought we'd have a lot to learn from them. And even though this was February, and most people in their right mind would not go to Wisconsin in February, I think it was 7 or 8 of us got on a plane, thank you GE Foundation, and went to visit Theta Care. And we learned a lot of different things, so it was a little intimidating actually, but the main thing that I took away was that this whole idea of creating a true north and focusing our efforts on a few things. I was of the mind that if you're a community health center and you're serving a community with people with multiple needs, that the more things you could do, the better. So this was not intuitive for me. I kind of thought, really only a few things. How am I going to deal with that? But I think that really got us started as a team thinking about lean. And so this was no longer really about me, which was different, but it was really about all of us working together.
So in essence, Laurie was sending us a message. She was saying, if you wanted to be on her team, you had to accept that the status quo that we had to be rejected. She was testing us. She was asking us, who is willing to change their mental model? Who is willing to be humble enough to let go of the very paradigm that led us to become senior managers, that was responsible for our success? And that we realized that as a group, maybe we didn't share very much, but what we did share was a complete hunger to change things for the better.
So while I was chewing about Theta Care and how they managed to prioritize everything, you know, I'd been thinking about, I'd been talking to Alice Lee at the Lean Enterprise Institute, and she kept saying, you know, if everything is a priority, then nothing is. So I kept asking, well, how do we get started? I mean, it's a little, you know, it's a little bit intimidating going to an organization like Theta Care that's been at Lean for a dozen years or more, and here we are just learning about it. So her recommendation was to start with what she called a model cell. So in our way of thinking, that would have been one team, or maybe a part of a primary care team, that would have some protected time to learn about lean and start thinking about their processes.
So this was quite a significant step. The step that I'm talking about is that she essentially was taking her authority as CEO, and those of us in the audience can tell you she was a very strong CEO. She was taking that authority and saying, I am investing part of my authority in an outside source of reference, to an outside standard. I will be on the journey with you. You will hold each other accountable, but I'm also opening myself as CEO to be held accountable to this outside source of wisdom.
And so the blue team seemed like the obvious group. They were the most interested in doing it, but I was having a problem. And the problem I was having is that in a primary care setting, your revenue is based on the number of visits that you provide. We began.
This is a crucial point for me at the time. Laurie never gave clinician time for improvement projects. She might give some time for retention, if someone threatened to leave, but she would never give time for improvement projects. So for me, that meant that Laurie was going beyond the theory of accepting lean, and she was committing to lean. And it led to a moment of clarity for me, which was, how was I going to prove to myself that I was also committing to the process of lean? And so that really started my journey, because I started reading, I started reaching out, I started asking for coaching, I started thinking, what's out there?
We began. And that really was the right decision, because what happened with the blue team was, I thought it was sort of miraculous, actually. This was a group who started off thinking about the fact that on a visit where we had our internal lean specialist, Kim Eng, go to watch with our medical director of that team, a visit. They went to look and see, and a pretty simple, uncomplicated visit took more than 2 hours. And why? Well, I'm sure everyone in the audience knows. It's, you know, things that happened. It was, you know, lack of communication, lack of everybody knowing what was going on with the visit, of all the things that can go wrong in a process. Over time, this group became incredible. I began to go visit because it gave me, with all the bad news about everything else, it was really fun to go see a team where all of the staff were really engaged in, coming up with ideas, innovating. They had such great, interesting things on the wall that talked about all the different causes for why a visit might take a long time. And they're measuring things. They were measuring things that I never occurred to me to measure. And the engagement of staff, I may have said this a few more times, but boy, it was really impressive. And so what started to happen is the teams nearby started to come along and copy some of the things that they were doing. And I remember Alice saying something about, don't push, pull. Well, it began to be clear what that meant. And the team had come up with these little homemade flags to put on the exam room so that everybody on the team would know what was going on in the exam room. Seems simple, doesn't it? But actually it was profound. And at this point, I think every team in the health center is using some variation of these flags because it makes visible what's going on with any patient at any given time. And these simple things that you would think you could think of on your own, I no longer had to think about them. And I began to realize that any idea I had was really not very interesting to the staff. The ideas that they had, knowing the process firsthand, were much more important.
So Laurie was undergoing her personal transformation through the model cell. My transformation happened differently. LEI, one day, brought in a co-learning partner, and there were a number of people from Brazil and from Spain. I think I saw Oriel earlier yesterday. And so as they began talking about what they were doing, someone mentioned that they were working with a whole ministry in Brazil. And that's when my road to Damascus moment, the angelic chorus, happened for me. Because I realized that if I became accomplished, if I was able to engage in this lean journey, and I was able to help transform the community health center, it meant that there was hope one day that in the Congo, somebody or somebodies would be able to accomplish the same thing. And essentially, I was able to marry the past and the present, that feeling, that fractured feeling that I had about myself. I was finding a way to present myself with a unified identity.
So I was really excited about all of this, but I was getting along in years, shall we say, and had made a decision to retire. But before I announced this to anyone, I started thinking a lot about how was I going to help the organization continue this, because it seemed to me that the work that we were doing was pretty amazing, and that if the next CEO wasn't really interested in lean, that a lot of this would go by the wayside. And I'd heard stories about other organizations where there'd been a change in leadership and the work stopped.
By that time, the senior team was already sold an idea of lean. We knew that this is the path I wanted to take. Now, mind you, there was a vast gulf between us thinking that lean was great and actually us incorporating lean thinking in our daily life and our daily routines. And we still tended to think that other people had to engage in lean, and we just had to do what we normally did. But nevertheless, we fought a lot, and we still do. But we were unified in the sense that we knew that lean was the way forward. So really the next group to target was our decision makers, the board.
I asked the board if they would be interested in a presentation by the blue team. We brought the whole team to the boardroom. All the staff gave a little piece of the presentation. Typically, the board was used to getting presentations by physicians only. This was really different. They were really engaged. And we brought the whole board over to the new space that we were building, and we had asked the blue team to do some of the redesign. This was at a time when the construction hadn't started, but we had prototypes and all sorts of things on the wall to talk about how the process, how much time does it take for each step in the visit, and where should it happen, and all of that sort of thing.
So essentially, we were showcasing our successes to as many stakeholders as possible.
And then luckily for us, the board chose our chief medical officer to be our new CEO. I do believe that it is easier when you have an internal hire to keep the continuity of interest in lean, but I suspect that some of the things that we did might have worked with an external hire too. I really do think so, because the board was on board, the senior management team was on board, and staff were really beginning to get excited about this. Clearly, it was infusing the culture, and I think that's what made it possible. And I think what ended up happening, especially as we start to think about the succession, is that the process of implementing lean at the Lynn Community Health Center was never about me. It was never about the internal lean leaders that we had that were teaching people how to use lean. It was never about any single member of our senior management team. It was really about all of us, and I kind of think it became organic. And as a CEO, you like to think that you're kind of, leading everything. And the truth was that it worked a whole lot better when I wasn't.
So this is the particular story of the Lynn Community Health Center CEO transition, and some of it is very particular to Laurie and Kiame. And obviously, we are hoping, that you're able to pull out some lessons that you can make use of in your own institution. And in the breakout session, we actually have a lot more of the how and the what this occurred for us to be able to spread the message within a year and a half and to make lean such a central part of our search for a CEO. But I think for me, there were 4 main points that I could distill in terms of the succession planning. Number one, when you look at the word succession, the root of it is success, right? And I think that we've bought into so much of the humility around lean that we forget to trumpet the successes that we have. And I think it's crucial for all the stakeholders that are around you to know that you are successful and to know that you are attributing that success to lean thinking. Now, this requires some amount of stepping back because you're saying, hey, as a leader, I'm a vessel, I'm not the one. For instance, when you look at John Shook, he's not on the cover of Newsweek magazine as the guru to the biggest companies, right? Instead, he wrote a book that nobody can remember the title of, so we always call it the Shook book, right? And it's a very complicated book. And second, I think that you have to identify people that have this twin and conflicting personality traits. They have to be both incredibly willing to admit that things are a total mess, and yet be able to believe that it can be different. So those are almost 2 contradictory thoughts. And then 3, I think it's essential that lean and lean thinking be set up as a source of independent authority and wisdom to which you as the CEO, as a leader, could be held accountable. You have to allow yourself to be challenged. And so now this is my contribution to the lean community. You have to be allowed to be challenged so that when someone tells you that's not very lean thinking, you have to acknowledge, wait for it, your lean deviant behavior. So that is my contribution to lean, the idea of lean deviant behavior. And the last point that I would make, and I think someone actually made it yesterday, is that succession planning starts from day one. You have to constantly be thinking, who can I identify? Who can I develop? who can I form, and not just for you, but throughout the organization. And it doesn't matter at which point in the journey you are. Even if you're only doing what someone called random acts of lean, that's okay if that's where you're at, or if you're at a more systemic place. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Doctor. It's good to see a transition that's succeeded so well. Let's see what is on the audience's mind. Well, how do you coach teams and individuals that resist being self-empowered? Do you have that problem? Are people resisting?
No. No. So I recently listened to a talk by Ta-Nehisi Coates, who's a sort of very pretty famous writer, and almost 90% of the questions that were asked him, he would just say, I'm just a writer, I don't know. And so I think that you know as well as I do that one of the central challenges of lean is resistance. Mm-hmm. And we'll keep talking about it over and over, but I'm not sure I have anything new to contribute in terms of how to diminish resistance, except that I will say that you really have to get to know your people individually so well that you can think of what is the medium by which I can enhance the possibility that they will go through the personal transformation.
Okay. And I think this is a related question. What actions as CEO do you take daily to keep the lean transformation going forward?
That's something that I dream about at night. I'm having recurrent dreams, actually, that I'm always falling behind or going backwards. So I think that probably relates to that question. I would say come to the breakout session if you want an answer to that. It's a long, complicated answer.
What got me, you're on board, the outgoing CEO is on board, the board's on board, some of the staff is on board. What about the docs? I mean, you're a physician. Were the doctors on board? And did the fact that you're also a doctor, did that lend credibility and say, convince them that, hey, maybe this lean thing is something we should get with too? Because I hear that a lot in healthcare, that sometimes it's difficult to get the doctors on board.
We do have one advantage, is that we are a social justice institution. So most people are there because they believe themselves to be doing God's work. They believe themselves to be providing a service that nobody else could provide. So as long as you can wrap whatever change you're bringing to them in that cloak, meaning that if you do this, your patients will do better. If you do this, your patients will live better. If you do this, your patients won't die. They will be on board. But in terms of doctors, as soon as I became an administrator, I ceased being a real doctor from a doctor's perspective. So I'm not sure I carry that credibility.
Well, unfortunately, we're out of time. We'll have to leave it there, but I'll invite everybody to the breakout session to learn more.
Thank you
very much. And now I would like to invite up from American Family Insurance, Matt Cornwell and Michelle Wingate.